Welcome to episode 282 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. Today's story is important to tell and retell. It's not only football history, it's human history. We must never forget, and may it never happen again. It's August 9, 1942. Kyiv, Nazi-occupied Ukraine, Zenit Stadium, FC Start against Flakelf. A team of former Dynamo Kyiv and Lokomotiv Kyiv footballers against the German Luftwaffe side. The final score, Start 5, Flakelf 3. And the match becomes known as the Death Match. A story of football, occupation, resistance, propaganda, myth, survival, and murder. It has to be told, but carefully, because the truth is more complicated than the legend. But how did we get here? Start with Kyiv before the match. June 22, 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. German armies move east through the Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine. Kyiv is encircled, and on September 19, 1941, the city falls. For many Ukrainians, the Soviet years had already been brutal. Stalin, purges, the Holodomor, fear, suspicion. So some people initially hoped the Germans might be liberators, and that hope dies almost immediately. Nazi ideology sees Slavs as inferior. Ukraine is not treated as a nation to be freed. It is treated as land to be controlled, stripped, and crushed. Erich Koch, Reichskommissar for Ukraine, rules with extreme brutality. Food becomes scarce. People are deported as forced labor. Reprisals are constant. And then comes Babyn Yar, September 29 and 30, 1941. German forces and collaborators murder almost 34,000 Jews in a ravine outside Kyiv. 2 days. Almost 34,000 human beings shot. That is the world this match belongs to. Not a sports film, not a stadium fairy tale, but a city under terror. Now the footballers. Dynamo Kyiv had been one of the important Soviet clubs, but Dynamo is also connected to the NKVD structure, the Soviet security world. That matters under occupation. The Germans do not see former Dynamo players simply as athletes. They can be read as politically suspicious. Some players become prisoners. Some are hungry. Some are hiding. Some have lost homes. And some have lost family. And then there's Josef Kordik, a Moravian baker stranded in Ukraine who manages to claim Volksdeutsch status under the Germans. He runs a large bread factory. One day he sees Mykola Trusevych, former Dynamo goalkeeper, one of his heroes. Trusevych is in terrible condition, homeless, hungry, and unshaven, a famous man reduced to survival. Kordik gives him work at the bakery, food, a place to sleep. And then Trusevych begins finding other footballers, Makar Honcharenko, Ivan Kuzmenko, Mikhailo Svyridovsky, Mikhailo Putistin, Paulo Komarov, others from Dynamo and Lokomotiv. A team forms around the bakery. At first they're literally the bakery team. Then they become Start, FC Start. Because football restarts in occupied Kyiv in 1942, partly because occupation authorities want the appearance of normal life. Schools reopen, gardens reopen, exhibition matches are allowed. Give people something to watch, something that says life is normal, even when life is far from normal. There's another local team too, Rukh, organized by Georgy Shvetsov, a former footballer and collaborator with the German-backed Ukrainian administration. In the simplified legend, Rukh becomes the collaborator team, Start the resistance team. But reality is messier. Start were not an underground unit. They were footballers trying to live, eat, play, and survive. But in occupation, even trying to be yourself can become political. Start begin winning. June 1942, they beat Rukh 7-2. They beat Hungarian soldiers 6-2. They beat a Romanian garrison side 11-0. They beat a German garrison team 6-0. The crowds grow. The meaning grows. The people of Kyiv see their players beating teams connected to the occupiers. And whether Start intended or not, victory starts to feel like defiance. Then comes Flakelf, a Luftwaffe team, German Air Force footballers, better players, a more serious opponent. And on August 6, Start beat Flakelf 5-1. That is embarrassing. So a rematch is arranged quickly. Posters go up. August 9, a rematch, billed as a revenge match. Start against Flakelf again. this time on a Sunday, this time with a larger crowd, this time with pressure in the air. Now the match itself is difficult. I have to say that clearly. There are legends around it. A German referee who is said to be an SS officer, a demand that start give a Nazi salute, a supported Soviet-style shout instead, a halftime warning that if they don't lose, they will be shot. Klymenko rounding the German goalkeeper late on, stopping on the line, refusing to score, and kicking the ball back upfield as the ultimate humiliation. Some of that may be true. Some of it may be memory. Some of it may be Soviet-era myth. The safest version is this. There was pressure. There was tension. Start almost certainly understood that beating the Germans again was dangerous. But they won anyway. The best known account has Flakelf scoring first. Alexei Klymenko equalizes. Honcharenko scores twice before halftime. Start lead 3-1. In the second half, both teams scored 2 more. Start 5, Flakelf 3. Final whistle. A football match has been won, and a legend has been born. But here's the part that matters. The players are not arrested as they walk off the pitch. That is one of the myths. A week later, Start play again against Rukh, and they win 8-0. Then on August 18, players are arrested at the bakery. Not all the men from the Flakelf match. The pattern suggests that Germans may be targeting former Dynamo players, men linked in German eyes to the NKVD club, not simply the 11 who beat Flakelf. They are taken to Gestapo headquarters, interrogated. Some are tortured. Mykola Trusevych is discovered to have been connected to Soviet security structures. He dies after torture. The others are sent to Syrets, the camp near Babyn Yar. Conditions are horrific. Hunger, labor, disease, random violence. The footballers are no longer footballers there. They are prisoners. Then February 1943, after Soviet resistance attacks in Kyiv, the Nazis carry out reprisals at Syrets. Prisoners are lined up. Every third man is selected and shot. Among the dead are Mykola Trusevych, Ivan Kuzmenko, and Alexei Klymenko. Trusevych, the goalkeeper who had been found by Kordik outside a cafe. Kuzmenko, the powerful forward. Klymenko, the young defender in the legend. 3 men linked forever to the match, killed not in a Hollywood climax, but in a camp, in a reprisal, inside a system of terror. That distinction matters, because the legend says they won the match and then they were shot for winning. But the historical record says they won the match. Later, several were arrested. Later still, some were murdered by the Nazi system. The match may have helped bring danger onto them. It almost certainly sharpened their tension. But the deaths cannot be reduced to one simple cause. They were killed because Nazi occupation was murderous, because Kyiv was under terror, because former Dynamo players were suspicious, because reprisals were routine, because human life in that system had been made disposable. But so what? We must not strip the story of courage just because the legend is not clean. That's very important. Sometimes historians correct a myth and people think the meaning has disappeared. Here, it hasn't. Even if nobody walked into the dressing room and said, lose or die, Start still played under occupation. They played hungry. They played watched. They played men connected to the military power ruling the city. And still they won. For the people in the crowd, that could matter deeply. In a city where open resistance could mean execution, watching local footballers beat the occupiers could become a way of feeling human again, a way of saying silently, they have not taken everything. The myth tells us about memory. Immediately after the war, the story is not easy to celebrate. But why? Because playing football under Nazi occupation can look like collaboration. Under Stalin, suspicion is deadly. Former prisoners of war are often treated as tainted. People who have survived occupation have to explain how they survived. So the story sits uneasily. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union begins to embrace the match as a heroic anti-fascist legend. In 1965, the murdered players are honored. In 1971, monuments are erected in Kyiv. The death match becomes part of Soviet memory, heroic, simplified, useful. After the fall of the Soviet Union, archives open more fully. Survivors speak more freely. The story becomes more complicated again, not less powerful, but more human. The match influenced culture. The 1961 Hungarian film 2 Halftimes in Hell draws from the idea of football under fascist captivity. Then in 1981 comes Escape to Victory. Pele, Bobby Moore, Ossie Ardiles, Sylvester Stallone, and my namesake and compatriot, Søren Lindsted. A football match against Nazis, a crowd, a rebellion, a dramatic escape. It's not the death match, but the echo is there. And that is how many people first feel the shape of this story. Football against fascism. But real history is colder. FC Start didn't get a Hollywood ending. This story speaks painfully in our time. The 1942 match is not a modern nationalist fairy tale. If it was resistance, it was largely Soviet resistance by Ukrainian footballers, trapped between Stalin's past and Hitler's occupation. Ukraine's history is not simple. That's the point. It is a country repeatedly caught between empires, ideologies, and armies. And in 1942, in Kyiv, football became one of the tiny spaces where people could still recognize themselves. And finally, the names matter. Mykola Trusevych, Ivan Kuzmenko, Oleksiy Klymenko, Mykola Trusevych, Makar Honcharenko, Mikhailo Svidrikovsky, Mikhailo Butistin. Not characters, not symbols first, but men, footballers, survivors and victims, people who had careers, families, jokes, fears, hunger, boots, shirts, and a ball. That is why we tell the story, not to polish the myth, but to remember the people inside it. Before we go, 3 things to take away from August 9, 1942. First, FC Start's 5-3 win over Flakelf was real, but the clean legend around it is not fully reliable. The threats, salute story, referee story, and final humiliation all belong to a contested memory. Second, the players were not executed immediately because they won. Several were arrested later, some were tortured or sent to Syrets, and Trusevych, Kuzmenko and Klymenko were murdered in a Nazi reprisal in 1943. Third, correcting the myth doesn't diminish the meaning. In occupied Kyiv, football gave people a way to see dignity, skill, and courage survive under terror. On this day in 1942, FC Start beat Flakelf 5-3. A football match became a legend. A legend became propaganda. Propaganda later became history's problem. But beneath all of it were real men, real occupation, real murder, and a story we still tell, so we never forget. That is all for episode 282 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. I am amazed at how the podcast algorithm works. OTD gets pushed in front of new people when you subscribe, rate it 5 stars, or share it with your friends. I can see how the needle moves on my end. It really helps, and I'm very grateful for your support. Tomorrow, we go to August 10, 1975, when East Germany won the last Pequeña Copa in Caracas. See you then.